Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt and I will be your host. Today we have a special guest with me. His name is David Beckemeyer. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing great, James. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for being here. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Yeah, so as noted, I'm David Beckemeyer. I'm out here in California, so I don't know, that might make you think a whole bunch of things before we even go any further. But I'm formerly a tech guy. I was in tech industry for a long time. I'm not that far away from Silicon Valley. And I retired from that space a few years ago and sort of found this world of politics and people being mad at each other a lot and kind of wanted to understand more about that. And that got me thinking about maybe a podcast would be a way I could do that. So I started this show, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So I guess unofficially, I'm a science journalist, I guess you could say.
Okay. You have your own podcast, and what's that called?
It's called Outrage Overload.
Outrage Overload. I have to subscribe to that and listen to it. I'm sure it's wonderful. It's probably a little bit more rambunctious than this one.
Well, actually, maybe the other way around. Actually, there are some similarities, too, because what we talk about, we're kind of meta, so we sort of talk about how we talk about politics, so we don't really advocate for issues and things like that.
I got you.
We kind of look at some of the social science, and I talk to practitioners in what's kind of known as this bridge-building space, where we're kind of trying to figure out how not to be so toxic and divisive.
Gotcha. I spent 30 years in information technology myself, and I just recently got kicked to the curb as a contractor again, like the third time in, 8 years. And once you're past 55, I turned 64 this year. Once you get past 55, you're considered a senior citizen. And corporate America apparently doesn't want to hire senior citizens because I keep hearing, well, you have an impressive background. We've decided to go with another candidate.
Right.
Well, I've got 30 years of experience in 7 industries, all my certifications, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I get it. I'm too old. You don't want to pay me what I'm worth or whatever the heck's going on. So I just told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm done with corporate America. I'm going to give it the middle finger and just start drawing my Social Security benefits, which I am now. And I still have to work part-time, kind of make ends meet. But once I turn, I'm hoping to get rid of the part-time security job so that I can do podcasting, writing, and photography, which is what I love to do now. And I started both of my podcasts back in May of 2023, and I've just had a lot of fun with them.
Oh, that's
awesome.
awesome.
My nose is itching. Yeah. So I'm going to read this off of your Podmatch profile. It says, the episode could focus on exploring the connections between political polarization and gun rights within the context of civil liberties, delving into how media influences public perception and polarization regarding gun control debates. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Did I write that? That sounds like way too many words.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost a run-on sentence, but you use some commas there, so...
I think I used to get downgraded for that in school, right? That I get some down points for doing that too much.
Well, before I hit the record button, we were talking about, the TV, any media platform that I like to watch News Nation, Fox News, and, I'm on Medium, I'm on Substack, I'm on Facebook, I'm on all these social media platforms, and everybody's just yelling and screaming at us, at each other because of the current political climate. And I liked your profile, and it kind of got my attention because there's two things that, especially in corporate America at your job, there's two things that you're not supposed to talk about. You know what those are?
I would guess religion and politics.
Yes, absolutely. And that's because we're so doggone passionate about what we believe. We have our belief systems. We have our political party that we subscribe to, blah, blah, blah. And so, corporate America is like, HR is like, no, those are topics you don't talk about because there's too many opportunities for people to turn sideways and get into fights over, right? So, and one of the statements I heard not too long ago, I think it was on Facebook. I don't know if it was a meme or somebody just made this comment. They said, how are we supposed to get along if we can't talk about politics and religion? Right? Why can't we have a civil discourse on what we believe and why? And why can't we agree to disagree? Why can't we respect one another's opinions? And I like how you said earlier that in, as soon as you hear that somebody's from California, you're like, oh, you live in a communist state, right? Like Connecticut, New Jersey, all these northeastern states where they don't even flag the American flag. I don't even think they own one, which I'm kidding. I'm sure they do. But and I started Palmetto Concealed Carry here in South Carolina, 15 years ago or longer. And we have a Facebook group called Palmetto Concealed Carry. We have one that's called Palmetto Concealed Carry Low Country. And on several occasions, some people, maybe myself out by mistake, made some sort of a comment about gun rights and the Second Amendment and liberals and Democrats not liking the Second Amendment and standing against it and blah, blah, blah. And it's, on a couple of occasions, I've had some Democrats stand up and go, hey, wait a minute, I own guns. I believe in the right of self-protection, and I believe that Americans have a right to own and bear arms. So don't be placing us in that bucket of yours, because, and I'm like, and it kind of took me by surprise, because I was like, because most of them, from my vantage point, most of them are anti-Second Amendment, anti-freedom, and so there are, believe it or not, there are Democrats out there that believe that red-blooded American citizens should have the protections afforded to them by the Second Amendment, the Constitution, all the amendments, the Bill of Rights, and all of that stuff, right? So when you said that you live in a purple part of the state in California, that was kind of funny. I was like, oh, wow. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's so many things there that we could, so many different threads we could pull on, and I've learned a lot, in doing this show and talking to so many experts across different disciplines. Right. But I think one thing about the problem of saying we can't talk about politics and religion is that means we have no practice at it, right? We're not used to it, and you have to practice it, because it's not really natural to counter people that have different views than you, right? So because we don't practice it, we don't have any skills in it, and we're just not used to it. And so a lot of times we just tweak, we just, our brain glitches when we run into people that have differing views, because we're so used to being in our bubbles, we're so used to not talking about it, this kind of thing. So it could really throw us off, and we're not any good at it. So we kind of panic and resort to, I'm going to show you this news article from Fox, or I'm going to show you this news article from MSNBC, and I'm going to straighten you out, because you've got the wrong idea, right? And that's kind of what we fall into right away. So yeah, not practicing it is bad. We should find ways to practice these kind of conversations a lot more. And I'm not saying you walk around and only talk about politics, but I mean, to leave it off the menu ever is kind of a detriment, I think, to all of our society. We have to get better at it, not stop doing it.
Right. So it's like we're lost in space, like the show Lost in Space. Danger, Will Robinson. Danger. Somebody's trying to talk about politics and religion. Danger. And yeah, you're right. We don't have that skill's not in our tool chest. And many years ago, I'm sure you remember the dial-up modems and AOL and CompuServe, and there was a thing called FidoNet. You had to log into a BBS, and there was this thing called FidoNet, which was just it was like a news group, multiple news groups, and they talked about politics and religion. And I had a Christian BBS called Cross Connection BBS and Jesus Connect. And actually a buddy of mine who lives in Hawaii, I think his was called Cross Connect. Mine was called Jesus Connect. And so we were on FidoNet for hours on end at night, in flame wars with other people who were debating my religious beliefs or my faith, and it was kind of wild. I did it for such a long time. I finally got burned out on it and was like, I'm kind of done with that. I think I've said everything I need to say. And I think everybody else was kind of the same way.
Well, that was one of the paths that led me to this podcast, because I was one of those guys out there getting in these online fights too. Yeah. And that's kind of the other side of that coin of not practicing it in real life is where can you go find a political discussion? Oh, you can find it on social media somewhere, right?
Sure. Yeah, always.
But that's a terrible place to have a conversation like that, right? I mean, just the platform and the whole mechanism of it, just leaves out the humanity of it and everything else, right? So, yeah, it's not the best place to practice that, because you learn some bad habits, and of course you'll find yourself getting riled up over things that maybe don't matter, because maybe the person you're talking to is really kind of crazy. You just don't know it, because
right.
You don't know the other person is a dog or whatever. What's that joke on the internet? You can't tell what you're working with. Whereas in real life you can kind of read some signals and something. How much energy do I want to put in this person that's literally standing on a soapbox and screaming, the end is nigh, right? Maybe I don't need to spend a lot of energy with that person, right? But on social media you kind of don't know that at first, right? It might take you a while to figure that out. So yeah, it's not the best place to have those conversations.
Well, the nice thing about podcasting, especially if you're doing video like we are, you can read people's body language. When you're on Facebook or X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, or any of these other social media platforms where you're texting comments back and forth or messages, it's really hard to tell how people are receiving your message, and if you're actually getting your message across, if you're presenting it in such a way that they understand. And I had a pastor friend of mine that told me one day, Pastor Tom, I noticed that he didn't really get involved in any of that on Facebook. He's on Facebook, and he is a Democrat, he's liberal, very much so. And he liked to have conversations about that, make little quip statements from the pulpit, when he was preaching. We used to get on to him all the time, like, you're not supposed to, you shouldn't be doing that from the pulpit. Don't be doing that. Leave those comments out. But he said something that made a lot of sense. He says I can't adequately address a topic in 140 characters. And he said, I'm just not going to get involved in it. I'm not going to waste my energy or my time trying to communicate on social media about a topic that is very involved, that's in depth, that requires some thought, right, and some research or whatever. And that made a lot of sense. I was like, yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, So anyway, sure. So what do you want to talk? What do you want to talk about? I know I've got these little questions that I could like wind you up, set you free, but
I think we can just chat.
Yeah.
So, well, you mentioned this idea of like people here in California and then sort of just make all these other assumptions, right? Oh, this guy's from California, therefore, ... right? And
right.
It's the same thing if you find out somebody, this person maybe said one thing that sounds like a liberal ideology, then that all must mean ... They're all going down this. They must also be aligned with all these other things. And I listened to one of your shows. And by the way, so we talked a little bit before we hit record too about that. I'm going to let my hair down a lot more on your show than I do on my show, right? I have a very, sort of nonpartisan, even-keeled sort of, position that I take on my show because I'm not there to advocate for, or take a stand on issues and things like that. I'm just there to say what is out there, what are people talking about, and who.
Right.
Who's saying what. But anyway, so I listened to one of your episodes about how you were talking about how, you were worried about, or you did lose some listeners, or you might lose some listeners because, you're a Second Amendment advocate, but you're not necessarily a strong Trump supporter, right?
Right.
And I was, and we had some conversations even before that, line a little bit before we even, set up the interview. And, for me, I suspect people find out that listen to my show. My show is kind of 60-40. The best I can tell. It's hard to get these kind of demographic numbers, kind of blue to red in terms of listeners. But I definitely have red-leaning listeners. And I also talk to a lot of red-leaning folks, bring folks from those perspectives onto the show. But my listeners are like 60-40 blue, right? So I guarantee you, I guess I shouldn't say I guarantee you, but I would not be surprised that some listeners might decide they don't want to listen to my show just for the fact that I agreed to come on this show, right? That's enough, right? Just the fact that I did that might be enough for them, right? And that speaks, I think, and that speaks, I think, to this idea of this ideological purity, right? Like, if any, this idea that you were saying you talk to Democrats that own guns. I obviously know a lot that do as well and support, but some of them almost have to do it closeted, like they can't tell their Democratic friends they have guns.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's the same way.
Because then they'd be labeled as a gun nut. Oh, you're a gun nut. You're not a true liberal. Get out of here.
Right. And I try to tell people, like in my neighborhood, if you just do the math, like if you take the math about every third person owns a gun, let's say, every third household, and that may be low, but I say then look to the left, and if you don't own them, look to the left, look to the right, because one of those neighbors does, right?
Right.
And the people that have to go, wait, what? Is that true? How is that true? It's like, well, I don't know, just do the math, right? But, and I think that's true. I don't remember the number of left-leaning or blue, how many blue people own guns, but it's a bigger number than most people think, right? I mean,
sure.
Most people say it's like 1 in 100 or something, but it's much more than that. It's like maybe 1 in 5, maybe it's even more than that. It's more than people think. And sometimes they're being hypocritical about it because, like you say, they won't necessarily be a gun rights advocate, but here, sometimes they're even saying they're anti-gun, but wait, you have guns. How can you be anti-gun if you have them, right? So, well, it's good for me, not good for you kind of thing, right? So that happens, I think, with everybody in these spaces. A lot of us have these misperceptions like that, and it's very quick to throw each other, kind of into these buckets and make all these assumptions. And you were talking about your pastor who, kind of worries about, 140 characters isn't enough. I mean, one thing I've learned about doing this show for a couple of years now is that everything's got more nuance to it than you think it does. Like everything, there's another side to that story. There's a little bit more, or you're only getting, like if you're mostly listening to some partisan news or reading partisan news, and every news is a little bit partisan because they have a story to tell, and we can talk about that as much as we want. But you're not getting the full story. Even if they're not quote unquote lying, telling all straight out lies, they're still probably leaving some stuff out. There's probably more to that story than you're hearing because there's a narrative they're trying to get over. They're trying to get you mad. That's why my show is called Outrage Overload, because they're trying to get us mad all the time, and they're really good at it. Like they know how to push our buttons.
We're all just walking around pissed off.
Yeah, we are.
Well, what's funny is that I work private security, and so I meet all types of people. I spent some time in law enforcement back in '82, and so I have experienced the best and the worst of humanity, right? And it's funny that I try not to be prejudiced, but I know that my parents were very prejudiced, and so I've had to fight that in my being, right? It's just ingrained in me. And so over the years, I've tried to overcome that. And some days are better than others, right? So just being transparent here, I just lost a couple of members, I think. No. Oops. But what I was going to say is that if you listen to social media or you listen to politics, a whole gambit and range of topics within all that. Let's just talk about prejudice, right? So if you're listening to social media or you're listening to TV, it's like whites hate blacks and blacks hate whites, right? And I'll go to Publix or I'll go to some grocery store, Walmart, whatever, and I'll see a black gentleman or black lady or whatever, and I'll be nice to them, and I'll say, "Hey, how's your day going? How are you? Hello." I'll just greet them, right? And it's really funny that most of them are shocked. They look at me and they go, "Hi." They were not expecting me as an older white man to be nice to them, right? And every once in a while, I'll get into especially if it's an older black gentleman, I'll shake his hand and go, "Hey, my name's James. What's your name?" Strike up a little bit of a conversation, and I'll say, "I've discovered that we really don't hate each other as much as the world would like to pit us against each other." Right? Now, granted, I'm not naive. I know that there are racial issues, and there's racial injustices, and I get all of that, right? I'm not naive to that, and I get it. The Jim Crow era and all of that was just horrible. We're still living through some of the remnants of that Jim Crow era. But it's funny in that, in other words, I don't have to own that. I don't have to embrace the message, the racial messaging that's going on in the world. I, as a red-blooded American white person, can be nice to whoever I want to be nice to. I can be nice to a black person. I can be nice to an Egyptian. I can be nice to a Portuguese person. Whatever, And that's one of the things I say on my podcast is that I try to, I'm going to lose some more members of my audience when I say this. What is that? Diversity, equality, and inclusion. I try to practice the DEI format, especially in my parenting podcast, and even on this one. ABC's of Parenting Adult Children. I've been accused on that podcast of being a faith-based Christian podcast. In my Facebook support group, which is private, I had this lady leave me a message. She says, I don't think I can be part of this group because it's a Christian support group. And I'm like, wait, no, it's not. I mean, we have people in our midst that have embraced some sort of faith walk. My wife and I are Christians, and I know there are several people. There's like 1.3 thousand members. And in that large group of people, you're going to have people that are all manner of faiths. They believe Buddhism, whatever, Christianity, you name it. There's probably people in there that have that. And so I'm like, I want this to be a safe place, even in this podcast, liberty and gun rights, right? I want this to be a safe place where people can come on and speak their mind within reason, right? And feel safe to be able to do that, And so anyway, not sure where I was going with all of that, but I just think it's...
So I'm a moderator for this group called Crossing Party Lines, which is a little bit like Braver Angels. So what we do is we organize these discussions. Mostly, it used to be more in person, but since the pandemic and all that, it's kind of been online, and we really haven't gotten back to in person yet. So these are like Zoom calls, and we invite people, with different perspectives to come on and talk about some topic. So there's like a group that comes up with the topics, and people can request topics, things like that. But anyway, whatever the topics are, then, we invite people to come up. And my job as a moderator is really just to make sure everybody has a chance to speak, and then just stay within some guidelines about, you're not insulting each other and this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But mostly it's about giving everybody a chance to say their view and making sure that, they're heard and they feel like they're heard. So some of my job is also to echo back, here's what I heard you say. Does that sound like I got it right? This kind of thing. And I don't add any qualifiers, or I don't have any, I don't endorse the topic or not. I just have to say, that's what you said. Thank you for saying that. And here's what I understand you to say. And so the whole point of that is to do that. And, in terms of there's something that we do in that thing, like you talked about the idea of safe space. And I was working in racial justice for a while, and you hear that word safe space a lot. We like to use this word called Brave, that we call Brave Space. And I don't know if we invented it or not, but anyway, we call it Brave Space, where the onus is on the listener, not the speaker, right? So sometimes when you think of safe space, it's like I have to make sure I'm going to say something that doesn't offend anybody, right? And so in this case, we tell people, you're going to get offended, right? If you're coming into this, then the onus is on you to take that. Listen to it and be there for it. And that's what we kind of call the brave space, is that, it's not up to the speaker not to offend everybody. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about literally tell everybody they're stupid or whatever, but just the views, that the views that they hold might offend you, right? Or might at least, maybe not offend, but they might upset you in some way, right? And so that's, I do really appreciate that you're creating that idea that you're having a space like that where people can say things and that you're there for it. And I don't know, you might push back, I don't know, but the idea that I can come on this show and I'm very torn on the gun advocacy and gun rights advocacy, right? Because I was very pro in my 20s, and I was out there campaigning for this all the time. And now I'm to this point where on some days I go like, man, you see one of these school shootings and you just kind of go, okay, I'm ready to try it. Let's take all the guns away. And then you see government doing something, you're like, no way, you are not coming for my guns, right? So I'm very torn on it from minute to minute, day to day kind of thing.
Well, one of the things that's kind of looming in the background, United Nations, number one, and I know President Trump wants us wants America to step away from the United Nations, and I've kind of got mixed feelings about that. I agree with some of the pros of doing that, but I also think there's some cons, and I'm not really educated enough about the United Nations to even make an intelligent conversation about it. However, one of the things about the United Nations, they have this thing called the Small Arms Treaty, and they quote unquote could possibly use that to disarm Americans. If that small arms treaty was embraced by all nations involved in the United Nations, then we don't have to worry about the American government coming to take our guns, but we have to worry about, and I don't even know, it's like one of these Red Dawn sort of things. You don't know what the possibility or probability of that happening is, but you worry about these trucks full of troops with blue helmets on going house to house, disarming Americans. And what did the Japanese say when they did not invade America? They said there's a gun behind every blade of grass. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why we all love Red. I don't know if you've seen Red Dawn or not. There's an older one with Patrick Swayze, and then there's a newer one. I loved them both, right? And it's like the idea, and this is very American, but the idea of some foreign country, parachuting into America and trying to overrun us is like, oh yeah, click, come on, come take over my dead body, right? And in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the amendments, the First Amendment gives us a right to free speech, right? And nowhere in the Constitution do you see anything about free speech zones. However, if you go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or around any of those government buildings, White House, whatever, Pentagon, they have what's called free speech zones. And you're not anywhere near those political offices or government offices, I should say. And I'm like, yes, the First Amendment gives us the right of the freedom of speech. We can say what we want to say, right? And we cannot be incarcerated or held liable. Let me back up. In America, we have the right to free speech, right? But you can't incite a riot. In other words, you have to own what you say, and you can't advocate hurting other people, right? You can't incite a riot and not expect to have any blowback, because you can be held responsible for that. Just like they, quote unquote, January 6th. Supposedly, President Trump, incited that riot. He was like, you go there, I'll be right there behind you, I'll be there right there with you, and then he went home, or whatever the situation was. He wasn't there, and of course, the January 6th riots happened, and sadly enough, some people got killed, police officers got killed, and so there's that. There's a hot topic.
Yeah.
And we don't have to engage in it. I'm just talking about, I'm just saying that Americans, liberty and gun rights, it's a very broad topic, and that may be one of the reasons why I'm having some difficulty finding, enough guests to be on here. So, but, what American in their right mind doesn't believe in liberty? That's all encompassing. right? I don't care what political party you subscribe to, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever. We all believe in the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, what is it? Liberty, what's that statement?
Life,
Liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's right. Yeah, we all believe that we all believe that we should be able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? It's the American dream. And who amongst us doesn't believe that? I don't know. I haven't met a person yet that said, "Oh no, I'm liberal and I don't believe in the pursuit of happiness, or I don't believe in liberty." We all believe in liberty, right? There's a cost to that, though. There's a cost to liberty, right?
Yeah, there's responsibility. I think this is one thing that we have to get better about is kind of reminding ourselves about things we already know and some of these core values like that we can actually share, like you say. One of my dreams is to kind of have some kind of a rally where it's filled with, people across the political spectrum, and we're like rallying for those kinds of things, right? We're rallying for things
right
like that. We can really find those shared values. Now, that doesn't solve all our problems, but at least we can see each other that we do have some of these things in common. I talked to one expert in this field, and they're like, it's a pretty low bar, but they're like saying, if this person you really hate because of all the things they believe and you think they're kind of evil and they do all these things, like, do you think they'd pull your kid out of a burning car? And if you can say yes, well, at least you got some starting point. Like, you can see some humanity in them, right? That they would pull your kid out of a burning car. So you have something in common there that, that kind of thing, right? And that's a pretty low bar, obviously, but some of that. And I think a lot of this is the devil gets in the details, right? When we say, okay, we all believe in liberty. But then, okay, what do you mean by it? What do I mean by it? And this kind of stuff. So you can get into some of that. But yeah, I definitely think that there's some of the, and I think some of that is very American, right? I mean, I think there are things that make America stand out. I mean, you mentioned the idea of the Japanese talking about there's a gun behind every blade of grass. There's things about it, like we shake things up, or like we're willing to do the weird thing. Like we aren't locked to a religion. We aren't a country based on religion. We aren't a country based on blood. We're a country of misfits, basically, right? And so we're a country built on these other things, like liberty, for instance. And so, that's part of the sort of meme, I think that we have to get behind more. When we have problems in America, we're the wacky ones. We come up with the crazy ideas, like try something, like just do the different thing. We don't have to do it the way, centuries and centuries of, going back to Romans or Greeks. We don't have to do that. Like, we started a different thing, and we can do things our own way. And I think we have to get that independent spirit sometimes that we kind of lose sight of, that, we aren't down to the shining beacon on the hill and all that anymore. But there's opportunity there for us to like unite as kind of the wacky ones. Like, we're Americans. We do things our way. We don't have to do it the way a certain church says or a certain bloodline or king says.
Right. Well, one of the things that I like to bring up, for better or for worse, it's like we're always forced to vote for the lesser of two evils, right? It's like the Republican Party, the best they could come up with was Donald Trump, for better or for worse. And the best that the Democratic Party could come up with was Joe Biden. Well, then Joe Biden, there was a lot of scuttlebutt about his mental faculties and his, inability to string sentences together, blah, 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 right? He's an older gentleman, so is Trump. And I think Biden's a little bit older, and he was exhibiting some possible inadequacies with regards to public speaking and blah, blah, blah. So then he stepped aside. I think he was forced to step aside, and then Kamala Harris was, well, that was kind of weird because Kamala Harris was not vetted by the Democratic Party, right? I mean, she didn't have to go through the same process anyway. I think it was kind of an emergency stopgap, whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyhow, 2016, 2008, it's like the American people are constantly forced to choose between the lesser of two evils. And I'm like, is that the best we can do in America? Is that, it's like only who can become president of the United States, right? And it's like one of the driving factors behind getting endorsed by the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Libertarians are there, but they're just kind of out of the picture. They've never really gotten any kind of foothold or traction in our political system. But it's like only people that are supported by each partisan house or the party itself, how much money is put in their coffers so they can get on TV and it costs money to become a president. You have to have the financial stability, you have to have the financial support behind you, to get those political ads in front of as many Americans as you can. Does that make sense?
Well, and it's even worse than that. And it's getting bad. I mean, even local house, like we have things around here where the $1 million spent to get on a school council, board or something. It's like insane the way that money gets spent. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of sort of institutional challenges that we have going on, and it is really tough. And the problem with the two parties don't really represent. We talked a little bit before about this idea of cross-cutting. If you have some of these views that don't necessarily fit all the buckets that you're supposed to hold, you can have this ideological purity that can kick you out of that group. But also, the reality is, though, that's most of us. I mean, that's, I think, the statistics that a lot of us don't understand. This idea that we have this sort of mythical idea of our political rival and what they look like, right? And we sort of check all these boxes, and they look like that. But in real life, that's not the majority. Don't look like that, right? I mean, there might be the 15 or 20% that do on both ends of that spectrum. Most of us are somewhere else. Like the boxes that we tick are some other weird set, and then we still have to get dumped in one bucket or the other. But most of us actually have more of these cross-cutting ideas, and some of us don't even really know because they don't pay attention to that many issues. That's another challenge we have in America, is that a lot of people don't really pay attention to the news. So there's guys like you and me that are out there wondering why people didn't notice this thing or that thing. Well, it's because they don't watch news at all. Like, we're thinking they're watching the wrong news.
Right.
They're not reading or watching any news. But yeah, I mean, the two-party system is definitely a challenge. The primary system that we have is definitely a challenge. You talked about the libertarians trying to get traction. I mean, one of the problems is anytime a third party starts to get a little traction, what happens is the issues that they were getting traction on tend to just be absorbed by the two major parties, right? And then they kind of can't get that. They can't get that momentum going. And I hope it's one of those things that it takes forever to change, but then once it changes fast. Because I think we know from statistics and a lot of research that I've been looking at this research for several years now, and we know from a lot of this research that, this is kind of where the outrage overload name comes from again. There's this idea of kind of this exhausted majority and this kind of thing that we are getting pretty tired of this. But then at the same time, we kind of participate in it. So it's like we're our own worst enemy in some ways. But yeah, we are. So maybe it will ultimately cross over and we'll start having things like, I think ranked choice voting is something to try. Do I know if it's going to work? No, I don't think anyone does. But we could try it more. I mean, we know it has some effect. We know it moderates the radical, the extremes a little bit, right? Neither candidate wants to be too extreme because they still want to inherit those votes that the other guy lost, right? So They don't want to be too extreme and completely alienate those people. So they tend to, at least in their rhetoric and in some of their positions, sort of moderate a little bit. So it has that effect. Will it solve all our problems? I don't know, but we got to try something. We got to try some things like that to somehow start breaking up this problem, like you say, that through this primary process, we're dumped with, like you get, say, 2016, you got Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This is the best we can come up with in a country of 300 and something million people.
Right. Yeah, it baffles me, and I'm like, in every time we go through this primary process, they have all these people. They have 8, 10, 12 people that wind up on stage, and they ask all of them the same questions about immigration, economy, whatever the hot topics of the day are, right? And they all answer, and it's like there have been several very, very intelligent, like this one guy was named Ben Carson. I forget what his name was. He was a black gentleman. He was a neurologist. That guy was really sharp. He had some very intelligent answers, and I was like, I like this guy. I like what he has to say. And there's a whole spectrum between being an idiot to being ridiculous, and everything in between. And it's like we have all of these, America's faced with all these social issues and immigration and our criminal justice system and our mental retardation system, our educational system. We have things that are just horribly broken that need to be fixed. And it's like, you would think with all the people that we have in our nation that we as a people could come up with somebody that has, or a group of people that have some intelligent answers. In other words, the solution to some of these problems can't be based on partisan politics, right? There has to be some common sense at some point. How do we fix the problem? Forget being Republican, forget being Democrat, forget being Libertarian, whatever. This is the problem. Let's get some smart people in the room to fix it, right? I don't get it. I just don't understand why we as a nation can't figure that out. right?
Yeah, I mean, we have become very divided. So we're not only divided somewhat evenly, we're also bitterly divided, right? So now, and it's like we've disincentivized our own politicians from working across the aisle, and like, the approach that you just said, right? If they're doing that, they're going to get criticism from their own base. Like, why do you dare talk to these people on the other side? You should not do that, right?
That's because of agendas. We have these baked-in agendas that have been there for 100, 200 years, right? It's not about fixing problems. It's about supporting our political agenda.
Well, yeah, but also to some extent, we the people are a little bit guilty of this, because when we should be encouraging our representatives to behave civilly and to engage in reaching across the aisle and things like that. Instead, we penalize them for it, right? So it's become like a performance art. And if you look at candidates that are on TV all the time, if you go look at their, like, when they're rated for actually doing their job, like, I'm supposed to legislate, I'm supposed to represent my constituents,
show up to vote.
I'm supposed to show up to vote, I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to do oversight, things like that, like the nuts and bolts of what their job supposedly is. Like, these people you see on TV are like the lowest rated people typically, right? Because they're really just performing all the time. They're not actually doing their job. But that's sort of become their job, because that's how they get elected. That's how the media promotes it. We promote it. I love that guy. And then you ask him, what legislation has he written or contributed to or whatever, right? And you find it's like basically nothing. Like, they've been in Congress for all these years and never done anything, right?
And that's because they spend 75% of their time trying to get money.
Right.
They spend 75% of their time fundraising. And it's crazy. And that happens on a local, state, and federal level. All different levels. I could talk for hours about the garbage that's going on in Columbia, South Carolina, and all the...
Well, and to the point of like diving in and working towards problems, I will say there are beginning to be some efforts on this, and they're not in the news, they're not getting the attention, and sometimes people think they're partisan when they're just not. They're like, these organizations typically aren't, but there are organizations out there that are trying to do these things, and the way it's happening though is more locally, right? Like, so, they'll because the way that you get stuff, the way that you don't start by saying we should be bipartisan. You start by saying we have this problem and we mutually agree that there's a problem to solve. And then you kind of have to be bipartisan if you're committed to solving that problem. But like I say, at the national level, sometimes that can be hard to do for all the incentives that I talked about. But on the local level, that can happen. That can happen. And you're seeing organizations like working on this, a lot of these civic rebuilding kind of efforts. So I don't want to be so down on everything. But like, the way it happens is bottom up. Like, this starts happening in your local community. Like, you could get involved now in your town council and things like that, and start putting some pressure on some of these happening. Even just finding out, like, what are the 12 issues, and is it potholes? Let's figure out how we're going to fix these potholes, whatever it is, right? So I mean, I don't want to be so negative on all this that nothing's happening, but we have to remember that, like, often it's in their local community where you can have more influence over it, because what's my vote worth in Washington, right? My one dumb vote, right? And it's only indirect, because I'm really voting for some guy here that is only, again, I only had my two dumb choices, so I had to pick the lesser of two evils, and they're not representing me very well, right? So it's distant that way. And then the other way around, like, stuff that happens in Washington, how much is it impacting me compared to things that might be happening in my own community? So I would say one way to stay a little bit less stressed about some of this is focus more on your community and less on what the heck they're doing in Washington or even at your state level.
Well, a couple of hot topics with regards to the federal government. One is term limits. We've got to figure out a way to get term limits implemented, because we've got legislators that are in their 80s. I think one just passed away recently. He was like 94 years old. He's been in there for 25, 30 years, whatever. And I'm sorry that he passed away, and not taking away from that. It's the circle of life. We all grow old and we die eventually. Right? But we've got career politicians that's not how we started out. That's not how our Constitution was written. We the people, we vote in people to represent the people, right? They're supposed to be there serving the betterment of their constituents, like Lindsey Graham. He's our representative in the federal government, and it's like he spends more time across the aisle being a Democrat, and that's why we call him a rhino, because he's not really he subscribes to the Republican Party, but he's more of a Democrat than a Republican, right? So term limits would end that, right? And we've got to get rid of lobbyists. People that are lining the pockets of our politicians to get specific bills passed. It happens on the state level, happens on the federal level. We got to fix. Those are two hot topic items that we've got to figure out how to fix, because until lobbyists stop putting money in the pockets of our politicians and swaying their votes, nothing's ever going to get fixed. And another thing I was going to tell you about is I think his name is Evan Jackwith. Maybe it's not Jackwith. It's Evan something with the solutionsparty.org. I don't know if you listened to that podcast episode, but you got to listen to it. And he talks about the Solutions Party as another political party in Washington, Seattle, Washington. He's trying to get it started. He's got to get like 50,000, 150,000 signatures, blah, blah, blah. There's a process he has to go through in order for the Solutions Party to become a viable political party in Seattle, Washington. And he wants to bring it to South Carolina, and but the test bed is going to be right there where he lives. And he's a global citizen. He's lived in, I think he said he spent some time in Japan, Australia, different places other than just America. So he's got a lot of different, I guess you could say, political perspectives that I would not have, because I've never been outside the U.S., except for maybe a couple of times. But I like the Solutions Party. I like the things that he's trying to implement. Whether it'll ever gain traction or not, the jury's out on that. And I certainly don't want to say anything negative about it, because I'm hoping that he does get some traction with it. I'm hoping that, it's a possibility. It's a viable change. It's a viable redirection, right? Going a different direction than what we're going on now.
Yeah, it's definitely, you mentioned like term limits, something like term limits. The challenge with stuff like term limits in our divided world right now is like anything that requires a supermajority like that is like really hard now. Like it's got to be something that's so broad, has such broad appeal that no one sees it as partisan, the whole thing. It's just so hard, because it's just to get those majorities now is nigh on impossible, right? I mean, it just almost never happens. Even we call a bipartisan bill that passes bipartisan if it has like 6 people from the other side that voted for it. We call that bipartisan. It's not like 50-50, right? It didn't have huge support from the other side, but it has like 6 people that voted across, and then we call it bipartisan, right?
Well, I don't know if he was Democrat or Republican, but there was a senator in Washington that proposed a bill for term limits. And it was just like a blip on the radar screen. You just kind of heard about it. It was on NBC Nightly News or Lester Holt or whoever, whatever news agency actually did a story on it, and it's like you heard about it and then you didn't hear about it. And it's like, I was talking to somebody the other day. I was like, whatever happened to that? I was like, oh, they killed that shit as quick as they could. They were like, no, we don't want term limits because we're making millions. We're becoming millionaires. Why would why would I want to cut off my nose to spite my face?
Right. If there was bipartisan support for anything, something like that would be like the other way around. Like we all don't want that, whether we're Democrat or Republican, right? We don't want that. But yeah, right. I think that's one of those issues that gets brought up a lot. Like I think there are a lot of bills that get, presented. They don't get very far on that topic, or it gets bolted into something else, but it never goes anywhere. And this is this problem we have of this division and this idea that, yeah, well, for one thing, we don't pay enough attention to this kind of stuff, right? Like you were saying, it kind of was a blip. It came up, went away. We let them get away with that, right? Like, why did you just let that die? Why did you let that die? We like that. Why did you let that die?
Because we don't support it.
Right.
It doesn't. And it does not benefit us. It hurts us. So we're not going to.
And there's no real consequences when they do that. Because it's that classic thing. You hate Congress, but you still vote your guy back in again, right? Because you don't want to vote for the other side. So we sort of have these people, like a Lindsey Graham or like some of these people we have out here that have been there forever. They never lose. And, nobody wants – but they still sort of aren't liked very much. I mean, what is it, like 20% approval rating in some of these cases?
A lot of those people are not even challenged. We have state representatives in Columbia that constantly just come up on the ballot, and there's nobody to challenge them. Nobody challenges them, so they just get voted in and voted in and voted in. They're just constantly there because nobody can get the support, the financial support, the political traction, whatever you want to call it, to challenge them, And it's crazy. Crazy talk. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, and then you have like these institutional things going on with both parties too, where like this is where this term like rhino came from too, right? Like these people feel like there's this like establishment Republicans that are detrimental to progress, progress from a sort of Republican perspective or conservative perspective. And of course, obviously, you have this Democratic establishment, which is how you end up with candidates like Clinton and Biden, right? And why it's hard for, the DNC chair fight was an interesting example. And who knows what and right now the Democratic Party is like in a total turmoil as to where to go from here after losing to Trump a second time. Losing to a candidate was never that popular. I mean, like, he has his base and he's a charismatic guy and all that. But if you actually look at his raw numbers, neither of these candidates were particularly popular, right? And they still lost. They still find a way to be less popular.
Oh man!
So there's radical. So that's just a mess right now. As how are these parties going to sort of clean house? And again, I think your lobbying point is a good one, right? I mean, not only do the lobbyists like to give money and influence votes, I mean, they write the frickin' legislation these days, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love it when senators stand up, they'll get questioned about a piece of legislation or whatever. It's coming up for a vote, blah, blah, blah. And, like the federal budget or whatever. Pick one. It doesn't matter. So there'll be a piece of legislation like the big, beautiful bill that President Trump got pushed through Congress, right? And it's like you hear about all of these bills that are being proposed that have all this stuff in it. Right. And of course, it has its fair share of pork belly stuff, garbage that's like shoved in between the pages that nobody's even aware of. And you'll hear senators, they'll get questioned by, a TV anchor or whatever, and they'll go, I don't have time to sit down and read a 3,000-page bill. I barely have time to vote on it, much less. Wait. You're telling me you voted yes for this crap and you didn't even read it. You didn't read it. You don't have time to read these bills and understand what's in them to make an educated guess as to whether or not it's going to benefit we the people. Well, that just my head spins around and my head explodes every time I hear somebody say shit like that. I'm like, what?
Well, there's a problem when like these bills they put out, like the summary is, here's the 8 things or 7 things that are in this, 5 things that are in this bill. Like it's not a very long list. Then you're like, well, why is it said 3,000 pages then?
Right. If there's only 5 things, why did it take us 3,000 pages to define them?
Yeah, so there's other stuff in there for sure, right?
Yeah. And we have an organization, a watchdog organization here in South Carolina called Conservatruth, and I joined it, and I get emails. I get email updates about all the, 800 bills, that our House of Representatives and Senators in Columbia, South Carolina are pushing through. And you know that those people are not sitting down and reading all of those bills. And in these 2 people that run Conservatruth, or maybe there's 3, it's a full-time job. It takes them all of their blood, sweat, and tears and money to sit down and analyze each one of these bills and to come back to South Carolinians and go, okay, this is what this bill says. This is the title of the bill. But this is what's really going on in this bill. And they break it down and they make it idiot-proof to tell you, get a hold of your representative and go, say no to this bill, and this is why. They give us the ammunition, they give us the intelligence to understand why the bill is bad and why it's not constitutional and why it infringes on our rights as citizens. And then, of course, we have to spoon-feed it to people and we have to get them. We have to try to figure out a way to motivate South Carolinians to quit being keyboard commandos and actually write an email, set up an appointment to go talk to their representatives, write a letter, make a phone call, just do something, do anything as we the people to affect change on our government. Well, that's making that happen. If you can ever figure out how to make that happen, let me know, and we can become millionaires just on that alone.
Yeah. Well, and people underestimate how much influence, with a local politician, your letter or your phone call has, right? I mean, they don't get that many letters and phone calls. So if they get sort of 10 saying something similar, they start paying attention to that. If they get 1,000, that's a really big deal.
I think at the federal level, they're probably so inundated with contacts, especially from the watchdog groups, right? The NRA, Palmetto Gun Rights, all these national level. I can't even think of. There are several gun rights organizations that I actually subscribe to and pay a monthly subscription fee to because they are there in Washington protecting our rights as we the people. That's the way I view it. They're not 100% legit, and I'm sure there's some things that they're not doing that they should be doing or whatever. But I think maybe at the federal level, they're just so. That's why they have staffers.
Right.
You leave a voicemail. If you send an email that winds up in this bucket, who knows how many people like Nancy Mace. I know that she's responded to me a couple of times. Lindsey Graham's responded to me a couple of times. I've sent these organizations, national Association of Gun Rights, NAGR. They send out these alerts. I'm part of South Carolina Carry, and we're a gun advocacy, gun education, gun rights 501c4 here in South Carolina, and we have our member base, our volunteers. Every time they join, it's like $25 a year to join. That puts them on an email list. We use MailChimp. Every time the idiots or the clowns in Columbia, South Carolina come up with some stupid bill that's going to infringe on our rights, we create a blog post. That blog post turns into an email alert, and they get an alert on their phones that says, hey, this is what they're trying to do. This is an action alert. This is what we want you to do. This is what we need you to do, right? So anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's like I say, don't underestimate what those contacting your rep is worth. I mean, it does mean something. Those staffers might get it first, but when they're seeing sort of 10 with a similar message, and and again, I think they still do have some of their issues. Are like, oh, it's another one of these gun nuts. I'm going to throw it over my shoulder, right? So
right.
They probably do have issues like that. But I mean, we don't think that your message doesn't have some influence. Now, it can be frustrating because many times you get back a letter 2 months later, and the response has nothing.
It's a
to do
form
with
letter.
What you, yeah, it's a total
it's a form letter that they send to everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for contacting me. I appreciate your support. Please keep voting me into office so I can keep making millions. No, they don't say that. But
they might refer you to some generic sort of thing that has nothing to do with what you sent them a message about.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I absolutely do want to advocate to the listening audience that if you get these email alerts from the different organizations that you subscribe to, no matter what it is, absolutely take the time to contact your representative, local, state, federal government, at whatever level, and make an effort to affect change in your community, right? And it's like if you don't vote. If you don't vote, you didn't have a say. It's like that's one of the beautiful things about being an American citizen is we have the privilege of going to vote. So go vote. Yeah, you may be forced to vote for the lesser of two evils, but at least you have a say in the process. And it's the same thing about these email alerts that you get, or if you see an article in the newspaper, or if you subscribe to NAGR or NRA or Families of the NRA or any multitude of organizations that are out there that are supposedly and possibly representing us in our rights, at the local, state, and federal level. Absolutely, you get an action alert. Please pay attention to it. Call your friends, call your family, call your neighbors. Say, hey, this is something that we need to be. It affects us, and so we need to be aware of it, and we need to do something. At the very least, don't do nothing, because doing nothing is the worst thing you could do, right?
Yeah, right. And in some sense, like the more people that do nothing, the happier they are to some degree, right? Then they don't have to listen to us. They don't have to respond to us.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. They'll just continue doing whatever they do. They'll sweep social issues under the rug, keep taking the bills and the money that the lobbyists are handing them, and just be happy as a clam, and. Our job as citizens is to remind them that we are the people, and you're there to service us, and you're there to serve us, and no, they're not going to be able to make everybody happy at once. That's not how it works, right? But right. the majority of us should be able to say, hey, they did the best they could to represent us, right? All right, guess what? Sure. We're already into an hour, and I think we just barely scratched the surface. And you really didn't let your hair down. I have to tell you, you're very, very moderate and calm, and that's fine. I'll have to have you back on, or maybe you can have me on your podcast, and I can rattle some cages or whatever.
There you go.
I'll start a fight. No, I don't want to start a fight. All right, so David, thank you for being on the podcast, and to my listening audience, I want to say thank you for the privilege of your time. Our podcast is hosted on Captivate FM, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. That's the audio version, and then I upload the video version of this podcast to rumble.com, just the common spelling, rumble.com, and to my YouTube channel. Be sure to share our podcast with your Second Amendment friends, family, and coworkers. You can contact me at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. That's Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. David, thank you for being here. And to the listening audience, I will say thank you and have a good day. Thanks for listening.